Felipe Argento, co-founder of the Cartesi project. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I spoke with Jill Gunter from Espresso about 2 weeks ago, and during our call, she mentioned Cartesi. That's when I looked up Cartesi, and I thought to myself, "Wow, I need to speak with these guys and get them on the pods." I'm so glad that you said yes and that you're on.
That's a great feedback to hear. We love the Espresso people. We have such a nice friendship. We do events together. We do some code integrations. They're so
Yeah,
nice.
that's good. That's good. Well, we'd love to hear about Cartesi and what you're doing. What I want to start out with, though, is kind of your origin story. I know you're a developer. You've been a developer for a while. I'm curious to know how you got into crypto, and also what the crypto culture and what how the crypto community is like in Brazil, where you're from.
Sure, yeah. So I actually stumbled upon crypto by I was on Reddit, just and I just kind of stumbled upon it. And then I was at the college during that, and I found a study group that was looking into crypto and so on. So I joined that group, and eventually I started my own company, which is not Cartesi. It was a development company and a consulting company. At the time, some big companies in Brazil, like electricity companies and so on, were trying to do something with blockchain. Though it was at the very beginning, the era in which we, we would try to decentralize everything, the ICO boom, and so on. Then I started that project, and then one day, Eric Demora, which is another founder of Cartesi, another co-founder, he called me and it's like, "Hey, I'm starting this project. Uh, come join me." And I was like, "No, I have my own thing. Why would I join you?" And then I went to look at the actual team that was building Cartesi with him, and then I found like two math professors at a math institute in Brazil, which is one of the most famous mathematics institutes in Latin America. There was this guy in Taiwan. I'm like, okay, these guys are much more prepared to face the world than I am alone. Then I called him back. I'm like, I'm sorry, actually, I want in, and that's how it started. But at the beginning, I fell in love with the. It mixed three things that I really like, which is like economics, politics, and development. So this like game theory aspect of it. And on the Brazilian community, I feel like us in Latin America, we have a sort of a different relationship with crypto because, well, when crypto first came about, Bitcoin and those projects, there's a lot of talk about inflation and protecting yourself from state currency and so on, right? From manipulation and those kind of things. And in Brazil, well, in Latin America in general, but Brazil specifically, we have dealt a lot with currency problems here, right? So this idea that money getting devalued, and I eventually moved on from the monetary aspects of it. The part I like more about blockchain now is human coordination and these other kinds of challenges. But the community in Brazil is quite strong because of these complicated past with government trust.
That's cool. I've worked with a number of developers and also founders from Brazil, and yeah, I mean, my sense is that it's growing and it's very strong, and it's pretty cool that DevCon is going to be in Argentina this year. So that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, DevConnect.
Yeah,
Yeah,
DevConnect.
yeah.
Yeah,
So actually, there's a funny story. So in Brazil in the 90s, we had like an insane inflation. Like prices at a supermarket were getting updated daily, right? Even sometimes hourly. And as a result of that, our banking system was always one of the most advanced banking systems in the world. Because if I send you R$ 5 today and it just arrives to you tomorrow, in that at the time it would be worth half the amount of money, right? Because it would actually go down daily. And nowadays, our central bank is actually one of the most advanced central banks in the relationship with blockchain. You have a lot of government projects using blockchain for transparency, for digital money, and so on.
That's
It's
cool. I
kind of
didn't
cool.
know that. That's really, really cool. Let's talk about Cartesi. Maybe explain to us kind of the problem that you saw that led to the development of Cartesi, and then let's get into Cartesi and how it solves that problem.
Sure. So the idea behind Cartesi is that so we're trying to do as an industry, we're trying to do decentralized compute, right? That's basically what we're trying to do. And then it turns out, if you looked at blockchain, the industry in general, 5 years ago, and also if you look at it now, we are losing the computing part. So we did a very good job at having the decentralized aspect of it, but the computing, in the sense of computing power, scalability, expressivity, all of that was lost. Which turns out, in turn, we only have like simple applications to play around with. We have a very limited environment to do the computing, and that's what we tried to solve, right? So we focused since the beginning in creating an execution environment that was scalable, was powerful, that was expressive. And now, 5 years later, 6 years later, we have what I think, and I could argue this with anyone, it's the best execution environment for blockchains. And I can explain why I can safely say it's the best. But that was the idea, was to get computing back to decentralized computing. So you can have like real applications. Not real is a bad word, but so you can have like complex, intricate applications in Web3 as well, and not be only limited by very simple things.
Got it. Now, from a technical perspective, it's so I'm reading from the website Linux-powered rollups, the simple way to build in Web3. Tell us about the Linux part and why that's important.
Sure. So this is a little bit on the concept of bringing the computing back. So the entire internet was built for Linux, right? Everything
Mhm.
that all applications that you run, they assume that under what they're running, there's a operating system, usually Linux. Uh, so when you use libraries, coding and you import a library, that library assumes that there's a file system and a memory management system, and so on and so forth. So the idea is that by having Linux running on your execution environment, that extends to you the capacity to use software that was made for Web2. So when I talk about Cartesi, I like to use the concept of backwards compatibility and
Mhm.
forward compatibility, right? So what we're trying to do is to bridge all the code, open source code that was written for Web2, and bridge that into Web3. And Linux is what makes that possible, right? So then, like, you can see Cartesi as a bridge from the software tools and infrastructure for on Web2 to Web3. And it's backwards compatible because you can use what was built in the past. You can use Rust, Python, NumPy, everything that runs on RISC-V. But it's also forward compatible, right? So recently we had the whole DeepSeek uh, launch that crashed the markets for a little bit. And we actually have an application on Cartesi that runs DeepSeek. Because of
Mm.
course DeepSeek was built in a way so to make it simpler. You have Llama, which it allows you to run an open source AI model, and you can run Llama on Cartesi, right? And therefore you
Mhm.
can run an application that's fully trustless on Web3, connects to Ethereum or connects to any other EVM compatible chain or any EVM L2, and you can run DeepSeek on that. Of course, like DeepSeek is super slow. It's not yet feasible to actually run an application that runs DeepSeek, but you can get to like a few tokens per second or something like that, and actually run it on chain. Sorry,
Got it.
yeah.
No, that's helpful. The subheadline says Cartesi's a modular powerful modular blockchain protocol that equips developers with access to a full Linux environment and high-performance rollups designed to support next-generation apps. And so you're positioning Cartesi as a modular blockchain. So it's not an L2. It's an L1 on which L2s could be built. Is that correct?
No, yeah, so that is a bit confusing, and
Okay.
it's good to have this feedback. What we mean by modular blockchain protocol is that, so there are a lot of problems to be solved in the industry, right? You have like data availability problems, you have consensus problems, you have execution problems, you have UX problems, liquidity problems, and so on. We're focused on solving the execution problem, right? So we are an execution environment, and it's a modular execution environment because you can run it in many different ways. So you can run it as an L2 on top of Ethereum. You can run it as an L3 on top of, say, ZK Sync or Arbitrum. Or you could run it as a layer one, but that requires a lot of other pieces such as consensus and so on. But we usually run Cartesi as an app chain rollup or an app chain layer 3. And we also have coprocessors going on. It's a new initiative that we started. So Cartesi coprocessors on top of EigenLayer. So that's why we use the word modular. But you should think of Cartesi as an execution environment that can be plugged in into many different protocols.
I see. Is Cartesi, so when you think of these like roll up as a service providers, RAS providers, is Cartesi one of the options if I wanted to build an app chain or a roll up? Could I choose to build it on Cartesi using one of these RAS providers?
I don't think we're integrated with REST providers yet, but you could launch a Cartesi app chain, and you just deploy it. And there's a service provider called Sunodo that is Cartesi specific, and it can run your validator node for you and so on if you don't want to run the infrastructure yourself.
I see.
But you also have the what I believe is the main setup, at least for the very paranoid users, which is that you are always able to run the application that you're interacting with on your machine. So you can make sure that it's running securely.
There are a lot of projects that are built on top of Cartesi. And I want to talk about these in a second, but it's very impressive. Can we talk about like the target customer for Cartesi? I imagine it's current developers. And please correct me if I'm wrong. It's developers that are trying to build a roll up or their own chain, and then they want to use kind of a for the lack of better terms, like a easy plug and play kind of software development kit underneath, something like that.
Yeah, that's a good question. So yes, the Cartesi is an SDK that is used by people who are trying to build their own chain or their own application, right? Because applications can be chains in the app chain model. So it's aimed at those who want to build something that is not buildable on Solidity, right? Solidity imposes some limitations. It makes you have to use Solidity. You cannot import decades of existing software and libraries and so on. So if you want to, we use this example of Angry Birds, right? If you wanted to build Angry Birds on chain, if you do it in Solidity, then you'll have to code the gravitational laws of physics in Solidity, right? If you are to code Angry Birds on Cartesi, you'll just import a physics library that exists in basically every language that you have, right? At the beginning, we were focusing on attracting Web2 founders to work on Web3. So the idea that since you have all these suites of software kits that you import from Web2, the idea that I can use that on Web3, we thought it would attract people from Web2 to build on Web3. Then we bumped into a problem, which was that we ended up having to explain what Web3 was to these Web2 people. And then we pivoted a little bit to try to attract Web3 people and convince them like, hey, look at the amount of tools that you have if you use Cartesi, right? You can use TensorFlow. You can code in C, C++, Rust, Python. You can import mathematical libraries and whatnot. And now I think we are a little bit back into bringing Web2 developers, because Web3 is more well known. There's more interest, and since we can easily onboard all these developers that are used to working with Web2 stacks to Web3, then we have a very good target audience there.
Are you looking at, when you think about your target audience, are you looking at specific developer communities like Rust developers, Python, and then maybe doing outreach and messaging to those specific language communities?
Yeah, we went less by language and more by vertical, right? So we got in contact with some game developers, for instance, that were used to building games for Web2, and now they're building games on Cartesi. We didn't go specifically for targeting a programming language group, but that's an idea.
I bring that up because I was looking at I'm actually really surprised. I'm not on LinkedIn very much, but today I was on LinkedIn looking at groups, and I noticed that there's a very big Solidity group on LinkedIn. There's also, of course, Rust and Python, you know, MATLAB, like lots of these language groups on LinkedIn, and I was actually really surprised. And I thought, I wonder if anyone's actually targeted these groups to, the maybe protocols that need developers to build on them to if they've actually targeted these groups. And so that's why I brought it up, because that could be an interesting kind of onboarding, kind of developer acquisition strategy. Because most crypto people I know, most crypto people I know are not on LinkedIn. And so I thought, if they're not on LinkedIn, then it might be a good place to actually do some work. So
yeah, it's quite interesting. I'll suggest that to our BD people, see if they can do some outreach. I'll get back to you.
Yeah. So the question of like, on which chain should I build my application is kind of a hard one, because there's a lot of options. And so how does Cartesi stand out from the crowd so that it attracts the right developer that it wants?
Yeah, so we tend to say, like, if you want to build a simple DeFi application and Solidity is enough for you, then like use Ethereum, use Arbitrum Optimism, something like that. If you want to build a complex application that takes care of an entire vertical, so if you want to do like an exchange with order books and lending and risk analysis, then you have to like use something more complex that allows you to extend abstractions. That is Cartesi, right? If you want to write a complicated game that involves physics, or a first-person shooter, or a strategy game that has complex logic and expensive computation, then you can use Cartesi. If you want to build something that leverages artificial intelligence, I mean, maybe you won't be able to use the current large language models with 700 billion parameters, but you can use TensorFlow, and you can use simpler models and stuff like that. Then use Cartesi, right? Because of this ability of us bridging trustlessly the Web2 world to Web3, if you want to build Web2 applications with the cool features of Web3, if you want to build Web2 applications that are trustless, permissionless, credibly neutral, and so on, then use Cartesi. That's how I think about it.
And that makes sense to me. If I were a developer and I heard that would actually resonate. What about the challenge around like latency and speed? And on which, I guess, if I were to build, let's say, a game, I mean, one of the key aspects is like immediate feedback to the user, to the player. How does Cartesi deal with requirements like that?
Yeah, sure. So a Cartesi app chain, can answer you about its state super quickly, right? It has two limitations though: the speed in which data comes in and the speed in which data comes out. Meaning that if you want to make, for instance, Ethereum be aware of the state of your game, or if you want to withdraw assets from the game you're playing, then there's a delay there. And there's a delay in which information can come in, right? So to make it trustless, the data has to be available on a blockchain, right? So if you're using Ethereum, pure Ethereum, then the inputs to your game, they have the latency of the inputs to Ethereum. Right? But if you're running a Cartesi application on top of Base, for instance, which we have some, you can play around. I can send you some links later. Then the delay for your inputs to get in is the delay of inputs making it into the Base layer 2. And that's why we're interacting with Espresso, by the way. Because if you run an application that uses Espresso to receive the interactions to the game and Cartesi to process them, then you can get your game to go as fast as the confirmation layer on Espresso goes, which is quite fast.
I see.
So
Okay.
it kind of depends on which setup you're running Cartesi on.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense to me, because oftentimes when I speak with founders of either layer ones or rollups, they talk quite a bit about this, like what they have control over, but there's kind of bottlenecks that are not in their control, and that often dictates also the types of applications that can be built on them. And so if I were a game developer, then and I want to and I'm building in a language that Cartesi supports, and if building on top of Ethereum layer 1 makes no sense for me, and Cartesi does make sense, but one of the requirements is I need immediate feedback on the state of this first person shooter game. Then what that means then is Cartesi plus Base might be the best kind of combination, I guess.
And if you need a lot of data for your game, then Cartesi plus like Celestia or Avail or another data availability layer. That's what we mean by modular in the website.
Yeah.
But a cool anecdote just to illustrate this is that our first games that we launched on Ethereum were all turn-based games. Because turn-based game is something that it doesn't require the fast interactions that you need, right? You can send your transaction, it's your turn, so you can wait for your transaction to make it into an Ethereum block at mined, and then you get a response, and then the other player plays, and so on. When you go to Base, then you can have a game that handles faster interactions. Maybe not real time yet, but I feel like we're approaching that as we go.
And that's pretty cool. And so it also dictates from a business development perspective, like which category of games that you're going after first, like what. And I brought up the roll up as a service provider, the RaaS aspect earlier, because as you're describing the offering of Cartesi, and because it is modular, at some point, these modular kind of services could get rolled up into a package. And so, for example, if I'm a developer and my game requires XYZ kind of, I have specific requirements, it would be really helpful for me to know, okay, I have these requirements, which means this package of Cartesi plus XYZ makes the most sense. Cartesi plus Base plus Celestia, and I also need, a ZK verifier or a ZK prover. So, Base plus Cartesi plus Celestia plus, I don't know, Succinct maybe. Something like that. Do you envision a world where there's kind of verticalization of Cartesi being one of the key kind of pillars, but then underneath it is like a package of things, including maybe even Espresso?
Yes, for sure. I think that's the vision we're going for. There are some concerns on security, for instance, because I imagine that the user will be abstracted away from all these decisions. So you do have to understand what are the trust assumptions that are getting added by each new block that you have, right? So if you're using Cartesi on top of Ethereum, then the trust assumptions are very well defined. If you're using Cartesi on top of, say, another proof of stake chain that the stake is not well distributed, and connecting to yet another data availability committee that you don't really know the trust assumptions on, then the risk is not the same as you using a more vanilla setup. So I think the challenge there is communicating to the users which trust assumptions they are adhering to, depending on the package that they're choosing. Right?
Mm. You mentioned rather than targeting developers by language, you're looking at categories, and you mentioned gaming as one of those. Are there other categories that are kind of a good fit for Cartesi that you're focused on now?
Yeah, for sure. So we have a very cool project that I'm excited about, which is a decentralized exchange, but they do dollar cost averaging, right? So you can state something like, I want to buy $1,000 in Ether across 1 month.
Mm.
And then each second it's going to buy a little bit of that Ether for the entire month, like split through the entire month. And I always think that it's such a common strategy in the real like TradFi. And we cannot do that on Web3 because that's too expensive, right? It's computationally expensive, and it's a lot of interactions. But on Cartesi, you can actually do it in a super clever way. And I imagine how much money people would have saved in bear markets, right? Because you can say like, okay, I'm going to sell 10% of my portfolio in 1 year, and you don't have to actually be looking at the market, trying to time the market. So I'm excited about that. There's another application that I like a lot, which is a totally different kind of application. It's called Bugbuster. It's a decentralized bug bounty program.
Mm.
So what you do on this application is that, well, the developer uploads a code, right? So I upload my software, and I say, this software cannot break in this way, right? So say I upload a bank and say, as no one can withdraw money from this bank but Alice. And that's there on a Cartesi machine, on a Cartesi app chain. Then if any developer sends a command to this program, to my program, that breaks the rule that I set, they automatically get paid, right? So it's a decentralized bug bounty program, because you say like, this is a program and this is what cannot happen. Mm. If someone forces it to happen, they automatically get paid without any judiciation, mediation. You don't have to trust that the guy that wrote the program is gonna pay you, because sometimes what happens is that you denounce a bug, and then the guys are like, okay, let me just check, and then they fix the bug and they don't give you the money, and they dispute that you actually found the bug. It's a very cool example. Yeah.
No, both of those sound really cool. The dollar cost averaging DEX sounds really amazing. Like I could see that really, really getting a lot of traction. And I mean, just imagine how much money and also time people would save not having to be, watching charts all day. Just set it and forget it.
And they're even adding, last time I checked, they were adding conditional rules as well. So you can do like complex stuff, like buy $1,000 of Ether if Ether price is below X, and sell $1,000 of Ether if Ether price is above Y.
Yeah,
and it's automatically trading. It's super cool.
That's really cool. So let's maybe extend that example. So let's say that application, that DEX goes live. I imagine that DEX will have its own token. How does Cartesi benefit from an application like that?
Yeah. So this utility for CTSI comes from a proposal called Validator Marketplace, right? So the idea is the following. You have a few options when interacting with a Cartesi application. Let's say I'm a user of that DEX, right? I have a few options. I can either run the DEX myself and verify, just as someone would run an Ethereum node, a full node, and be sure that everything is happening correctly, or I can trust someone to run it, right? Now all I need is a single honest person. Out of everyone that's running, I need a single honest person to ensure the correct result. So the validator marketplace is a network of professional software operators that run these applications, right? So I can trust a professional software operator to verify that this text that I'm using is working correctly. And that's great because maybe I run the node myself, but maybe I want to go on a trip and I want to check the information on my cell phone, and then I can connect to this validator that I trust and use it there. And these validators, they have, according to the proposal, they have to stake CTSI to be able to validate. They get fees on the usage of the applications. So in a sense, there's a connection between the size of the Cartesi ecosystem, the amount of dApps, the demands, and the utility of the CTSI token.
Got it. So for the audience, CTSI is the token for Cartesi.
Yes.
Got it. What about settlement? Do transactions settle on Cartesi, or is that on, since Cartesi is at the execution layer,
yes,
then the settlement layer would be Ethereum. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. I mean, as it's modular, you can choose the settlement layer that you want. We use Ethereum. Yeah, I think every app that I know is either settling on Ethereum or on a layer 2 on top of Ethereum. So you could use Base as your settlement layer.
I see. Could it, in Cartesi is only EVM, and so meaning I couldn't settle in Solana?
So that's a good question. So yes, all our packages and code is EVM, and we only coded on the fraud-proof game for EVM. But there's nothing fundamental that stops the Cartesi machine, Cartesi rollups, to also working on Solana. We just haven't built that code yet.
I see.
But if you could connect Solana to a data as a data availability layer, or connect Solana as a settlement layer. You just have to create bridges to Cartesi that we haven't.
Or even Bitcoin, is that correct?
Yeah. So Bitcoin is a bit harder, because part of our fraud-proof game is you being able to execute, and it's a little bit technical, but it's you being able to execute a very, very tiny step of the entire execution, right? So to prove that what's running on the Cartesi machine is running correctly, in the case you get attacked, you might have to prove like an addition or a multiplication or a load on-chain. And on Bitcoin, you lack the programmability of doing that. But having said that, of the BTVM kind of initiative, maybe that's going to be possible.
Yeah. Because I met with a project just this week that's actually, they're using Solana as the execution layer, but Ethereum as the settlement layer. And so here we're seeing it the opposite. Here it's, Cartesi as the execution layer with Ethereum as the settlement layer. And so I thought, well, what's stopping Cartesi from doing the same thing? With Cartesi and Solana as the settlement layer, and the opportunities that could potentially provide,
Yeah, it's very interesting. And by the way, I would invite your audience. We have an open Discord, so everything we do, both research and development, is public on our Discord. Everything is open source. So I'd love to get an initiative going to port Cartesi to Solana, and we would for sure help that out. If you come to our Discord, if that's something that you're interested in, just show up there and let's talk. I think that would be very interesting.
No, I think that would be.
We have to focus, right? I think we have a problem. I think we created something that is, well, I'm in love with it, right? But it's so amazing that we can see so many different uses for it. But in reality, to create production level code that can hold a lot of money, you have to be very careful. You have to do it in the correct way. You have to verify that everything you're doing is to the like utmost standard, So
Yeah.
that limits the amount of things you can do at the same time. So that's why we're focusing on Ethereum. But I'm also a lover of Ethereum. I'm in love with that project. So I do have a personal preference for it. But I think it would be very cool to have Cartesi running on Solana.
Yeah. I looked at the YouTube page, and there's over almost 300 videos, which tells me that Cartesi cares a lot about developer education, and just education in general for the community. Tell us more about the strategy behind that, like why educating developers and educating kind of community members is like, how important is that to Cartesi?
Sure. So I think we have a problem with Web3 that we try to ignore sometimes, and we try to not talk about it, but it's the lack of applications that are actually being used, right, by end users. So people actually going on chain and doing something other than just trying to predict what's going to be used in the future, right? And I believe that the only way to make that happen is by quantity, right? To have the biggest amount of possible people building something that they believe will be useful. And in the numbers, you'll get the gems, and the gems are going to be the apps that are actually used and that people can interact with, and it's going to improve someone's life. So that's what we're trying to do with Cartesi. We built this super cool infrastructure for you to build your own application. But now we have to attract people to actually go and build their applications, right? So we have to go out there and educate people, show them how to use Cartesi, show them what they can build, and try to find the use cases as an industry.
I think that's really good that you're doing your part in helping to educate the developers, the community, and YouTube is a really good way to do that. What else in your like content strategy that you're implementing to help kind of bring education, not just to Cartesi, but really to kind of blockchain in general? Like, how do you think about content strategy that way?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we try to have a dev journey that is very well structured and that actually teaches you as you build. So to guide people through all the steps to building a Cartesi application, and in the process, you end up explaining things about like the base layer, what does settling means, what are tokens, assets, composabilities. These are all concepts that are baked in documentation and that journey. We try to explain that Cartesi is one piece of the puzzle of our larger infrastructure. We are a very important piece, which is execution, but we are solving one problem, and there are other problems that are solved by other projects that people should be aware of as well. And we also try to generate content. So we have this very cool event that happens, I guess, once every 6 months, called Experiment Week, which we stop everything we're doing for 1 week, and we build something cool. On top of Cartesi. So the core developers who are there all day looking at bits and bytes, they stop what they're doing and they build a game, or they build a crazy, a crazy DeFi experiment. This last time we partnered up with Eigenlayer to do that, and man, the results were so cool. And it's both a way to experiment and improve what we're building, but it's also a way to point to the use cases that we want people to build and try out.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I meant to comment too on the dev journey. You go to the homepage and the first button there is start building. And then the second page is 3 ways to getting started on Cartesi. Like the dev journey is very clean. It's go to docs, read guide, join Discord. And I love that because you're virtually hand holding the developer. Some developers don't need this. but I think most do. I think most are actually like they don't know what to do, and so helping them, holding their hand through the process is so helpful. And so that's, kudos to your level of like emphasis on the dev journey. And I love that.
Thank you. I know
And
some people who are going to be very happy with that feedback.
yeah,
There's
it's
a
great.
lot of
It's
hard
great.
work, yeah.
It is hard work. It is hard work. And in crypto, we kind of assume that, developers they can just do the research on their own. But the truth is a lot of developers, they still need that kind of guidance and coaching and mentoring. And if you can't be there in person, then make sure your docs are clean and helpful and easy to understand. You can find things. No one wants to hunt for stuff. And
Yeah,
having it readily available helps so much.
we want you, like, if you come to build on Cartesi, we
Yeah.
want you to focus on what you're building, right? And not trying to learn how Cartesi works, how blockchain works, how Solidity works. We want you to sit down and code and solve the problem that you want to solve, right? And let the problems that we're solving for us to solve. And you just use what we already solved. And I think otherwise, like, I mean, it's already hard to build a cool application, right? If you have to struggle to find out how to use the framework and read their source code and so on, you're just
Hmm.
wasting time, and time that
Yeah.
could be used for writing, cool stuff.
No, fully agree. One last thing before we get off that I want to kind of give you guys a compliment on. On the developers page, cartesi.io/developers, towards the bottom shows uh, meet the teams building and innovating on Cartesi. And so seeing people's faces makes a big difference. Um, and there's all levels of developers. There's experienced to brand new, and what it shows is that, Cartesi is for everybody. It doesn't matter what kind of developer you are, what language or level of experience, come to Cartesi. And that speaks a lot. So again, that's a compliment for you and the team. And these are YouTube videos, and so these are testimonials again. And so it's, again, when you hear people's voices, when you see their face, it's like, okay, I'm comfortable giving Cartesi a try. And that's really kind of that's really the call to action there. And so compliments to you and the team on that. Um, well, Felipe, thank you so much for taking the time to meet with us and to tell us about Cartesi and the great things that you and the team are doing. I will be sure to share URLs and also any links to the project. Any last words you'd like to leave with the audience before we get off?
So it was an immense pleasure to meet you and to be on this interview. Thank you so much on this conversation, not interview. Thank you so much for the kind words. And I'll just invite everyone to come to our Discord. We do accept every developer. We're always there chatting, having fun, building cool stuff. So come, we'll learn a lot. And I'm excited to meet you all.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Felipe.